Hello everyone, in today's video we will be setting up a companion AI. We will be able to hire his services and send him back if we no longer need him. We'll be setting up some UI elements, follow and unfollow actions, and additionally we'll be using some new animations and a bit more advanced behavior. In order to achieve this we will need Unity, Game Creator, and the Stats and Behavior module. If you want the companion to be able to shoot or melee, you will need those modules as well. What I'll be showing here is one of the ways to do things, but there are many others. The goal here is to create a base from which you can expand upon if needed. So let's dive in. Now before setting up our scene, I'm going to show you what the end result will look like. So we have our player controller, an enemy, and our companion. So let's hit play. Now our companion is relaxing, so I'm going to approach him. You will see hold caps to hire mercenary. So let's do that. They're going to engage in conversation. And once they're done conversing, he will follow us. Now let's head over. Let me grab a revolver as well. There we go. So let's head over to our enemy. Now, the moment our AI spots him, he will engage in combat, and he is just a terrible shot. He's a terrible shot, just like
What?
Well, just like the enemy. To be fair. But the moment he loses sight of our enemy, he will stop shooting as well. And hopefully he's able to finish him off before I die. But there we go. So our enemy dies, and this will stop his behavior. So he will just go back to following us. He will stop shooting. Now he's done what he's supposed to do. So I'm going to hold caps again. And he will wave at us and say part ways. Now he's going to go back to his original place. Let's wait for him there. And now I miss him, so I'm like, you know what? Let's hire you again. And we will hire him again. And there we go. That's it. Now, let's send you back, because I don't actually need you. And that's it. That's what we're going to do today. So for the setup, I'll be using this scene. This is the scene we set up for our character controller. Now, if you didn't watch that, please do. But if you already have one and you completely want to skip that, you do not need this scene. You can just create a new one or drag the companion in an existing scene. I'll be using this one because it already has an character set up and it already has an enemy set up. Again, you don't have to set up an enemy. If you just want the companion to behave a certain way, that's completely fine, and just skip the combat steps at the end of the video. But for the purpose of making things easy, I'll just be using this one. So let's duplicate this scene and let's call it tutorial companion, and let's open it up. So there we go. Let's turn all of this back on. So really simple scene, nothing special. We won't actually be using these things, but there you go. Now the first thing we're actually going to do is we're going to make a small change to our enemy AI. And again, if you're not going to set one up or don't have one or didn't follow that, that's completely fine. Just skip this. But I want to add an additional state. So create empty, and this is called is, well, let's just call it alive, question mark. Now I'll explain in a bit what this actually does, but for now just add it to the enemy. And then next up, what we're going to do is we're going to go to his health conditions. Here you will find his ragdoll, so the moment he dies he turns into a ragdoll, and destroy after finishing. Now nothing actually really happens with the character, so his behavior still exists, just none of it is active. Now in order to disable certain things after a character's death, I'm going to use this alive state. So set active, we're going to drag in the alive and we're going to turn it off. Now the moment alive is no longer active, this will trigger behavior for the companion we're going to set up. So we'll get back to that later on. Now that we've done that, it's time to actually create our companion. So let's call this companion AI. That's a fine spot. Pretty sure. Yeah, that's a good spot. Now let's create a character. Let's drag him here. Yeah, parallel. I don't want him to spot our player straight away. There we go. Let's drag this on top. It will just make things easier in a bit. Perfect. So let's drag our character in the companion AI, and this is the one we're actually going to be turning around, not the character itself. There we go. So yeah, just really the basic character. Now we're going to add some things. Let's add a behavior. Let's add a perception. I'm going to make this a lot smaller. I'm going to do 10. This is his field of view. So as you can see, we won't be in his field of view at the moment we start, which is what we want, obviously. Now I'll add a stats module just so you know where to put it. I'm not going to go over how to set up his health, etc. Please just watch my enemy AI, shooter AI or melee AI tutorial that will show you how to do it. It's literally exactly the same as in that video, but this is already going to be a long video, so I want to save some time. Now we have all of these basic things set up. Now we're going to add one more thing to his root straight away, and this is going to be his home location. So let's add a marker, and let's just, there we go. Let's turn this back on. It's easier that way. There we go. So this will be his home location. We'll be calling on that later on. So this is going to be part of his of the companion AI folder. So don't drag it into the character folder. Otherwise, this will just move along with him. We don't want that, obviously. You don't even have to have it inside of the companion AI. You can have it somewhere else, as long as it's not in the character folder, so it doesn't move along with him. Now I'm already going to create his combat actions with a simple condition. There we go. We don't have to set this up straight away. I just want this to already be there. Now next up, what we're going to do is we're going to create his engagement function. So what happens when we actually engage with our character. Now this does need to be part of his root folder. This needs to move along with him. So let's call this engage. Let's just keep it simple. And this will have a box collider. Now this box collider is going to be a trigger. You can also use a sphere collider if you want to be able to engage with him while standing behind him. I don't want that. I only want to be able to engage with him while I'm standing in front of him. So that's why, let's just make it slightly bigger so we don't have to be directly in his face. But make sure it's not too big so it doesn't trigger while he follows you around. There we go. That's a decent distance. Now we're going to be adding some triggers here. So first trigger will be on player enter. So let's just look for player enter. There we go. This will require some conditions which we'll set up. So let's already toggle that. Now next up we're going to add another trigger, which is what happens when our player exits the area. So on player exit. This will only need a couple of actions. And lastly, we're going to decide what happens once we actually press a button. So let's go to input and on key hold. There we go. Now I'm using caps because it's really close to the tab I set up previously. I wouldn't actually recommend using this as it can be annoying at times, but it's just an easy layout for me. But change this to whatever you want. If you're using a controller input, just doesn't really matter. So we have this all set up, so perfect. So next we'll want to have conditions for this as well. Now before we go and set up all of those conditions and those actions, I'm going to set up two canvases. Now these canvases will be called upon in those conditions and actions. That's why I want to set them up first. So let's create our first one. There we go. And all this canvas needs is an image where, no, let's actually make you a lot smaller first. So let's go back to our 2D view. You are enormous. Oh, this is also our normal UI, so let's turn that off. So our canvas is gigantic. Let's make sure this is set to world space so we can actually resize it. 0.1, 0.1. There we go, that's already a lot better. I think it needs to be even smaller. Now this looks really small, but pretty sure it's actually still going to be too big. Let's just move it. Oh, that's a bit too low. There we go. Yes, it's still going to be way too big, but that's fine. We can resize it yet again. There we go. So I want this to be just in front of our companion. So let's add another 0 to that. This is going to make it all really small, but oh, not half that F. And that's about right. That's fine. We won't see the outlines of the canvas. We will only see what we're going to put inside of the canvas. So this is in front. Yeah, there we go. That's nicely put in front of him. Cool. Now let's add an image to this. UI image. I'm going to switch back to 2D view just because that makes it slightly easier. It's going to be here, not in front of his face. There we go. Going to make this black, and semi-transparent, so 60 is a fine value. And then let's add another text field, white text, and this will give our instructions. So hold, well, in my case caps, but I advise you to use something else, whatever you find easy. To hire mercenary. Now, if you're not going to set this up as a character that engages in combat and you just want, I don't know, you just want a friend, then obviously change the text to something else. Overflow, well, 50 is a bit too much. Let's do 40, and let's make our image slightly bigger. So there we go. And there we have our text. So let's turn off that 2D again. And yeah, that seems about right. That's a fine distance. So let's rename this canvas. Let's call this canvas higher. I'm keeping the canvas in there because I just want to make sure I remember what is what. And this is going to be canvas let go. Now we'll set both of, oh, let's set this as inactive already, and in this one let's change the text so it's no longer going to be to hire mercenary but to let him go. I don't know if that's the best text, but fine, whatever, it works. Now let's turn that off as well, because we don't want any of these to be active by default. That's why we set up those conditions. Now let's start with setting up the conditions for when we actually enter his trigger box. So I think I actually forgot one thing. Yeah, I forgot one thing. This will make more sense later on, but for now let's just add this start field, and let's turn that off. So let me drag that on top of him. There we go. And we're going to disable that. So this start is something we'll be using in his behavior tree. It's comparable to the alive we set up for our enemy AI. So it's a simple toggle active. You can use variables for this as well. I just find this a lot easier in my experience. But if you prefer toggles, please go ahead and use toggles. So let's set up the condition for our onPlayer enter. Set as condition tree. So what we're going to do here, if start set active, where is active? There we go. If start is active, we're going to add actions. And if it's not active, we're going to create actions. Now, if start is not active, what we want to do is we want to activate canvas hire. So this will need to be active. So the moment he enters, start is not active at this moment, we will see the canvas to hire him. Now, if we already hired him, which we're going to set up later, we want to disable canvas hire. So active. So this will need to be disabled because we already hired our companion. Now let's duplicate that, and we're going to activate let go. So basically what it means is the moment a behavior we're going to set up that's going to trigger once we hire him, If that's active, we want to be able to let him go. If that's, at least see the message. If it's not active, we want to be able to hire him. Now we're going to set up those behaviors in a bit. Now next up, we are going to change what actually happens when you exit the field, and that's going to be really simple. Again, we're going to use set active, and we just want to make sure that no matter which state we're in, so if we hired him or we let him go, that both of those boxes are not visible. So I don't want to be able to see those canvases from the other side of the screen. I only want to be able to see those messages if I'm close to our companion. So that's it. So lastly, we're going to set up the conditions on key hold. So what is going to happen once we press caps? So there will be two different scenarios which we're going to set up. So if we already hired him, which is what the start function will refer to, we want to send him back. We will no longer need him, so I'm going to stop all of his behaviors. And I know we didn't set these up yet, but it'll make sense in a bit. Now he's going to be a nice guy, so he's going to wave at us. He's going to wave goodbye, so we're going to use a gesture for that. Now I am using, let's drag you in. Now I am using some custom animations here. You can use the default state wave, which is included. I'm using some custom animations. I think the asset is called Basic Motions Pro Pack. It includes a lot of basic animations, and it's on sale right now. And I think it's like 8 euros including tax, so it's pretty cheap. So this will be the hand wave. So there we go. Let's wait until this completes. I don't want him to move around while waving. So he's going to wave at us, and then he's going to move. Now he will move back to hit the marker we set up initially. So his home marker, and wait until he arrives. Once he arrives, let's give him a second. Let's not exaggerate either. So we'll give him a second, and we're going to disable start again. So again, start is something that will refer to all of his behaviors. So we're going to disable that again because he's no longer hired. And lastly, we want to start his normal behavior tree again. So reason I can't use update at the beginning, so I can't force update his behavior, is because it will still trigger some of the behaviors we're going to set up a bit. So I really have to stop his behavior, and once he gets there, turn them back on. That's simply because if I would use update, he might still see us in the meantime. And as you know, everything in the behavior tree overrides everything else we set up, and if he sees us, he's going to go back to following us, which we do not want. So that's why we're really stopping his behavior and turning it back on at the end. So this will make a lot more sense in a bit. Now, this is everything that happens if we already hired him. So let's pull all of that down. Let's create a new set of actions, and this is what's going to happen if we didn't hire him yet. So it's going to update our existing behavior. So let's drag in our character again, and I want to have a little conversation with him. So I'm going to set some things up, and again, these are all based on the animations I purchased. So if you do not have those animations, you can completely skip this, use your own animations. You decide, it's up to you. But while they're having this conversation, I don't want our player to be playable. So I'm going to change a property. So where are we? Change property. So the player is no longer controllable. So while they're having their conversation, he will just finish that conversation, and after he's finished his conversation, we can control him again. If we don't do that, he will use those conversation animations while you're running around, and it looks utterly ridiculous. Now let's make sure he's rotated. So our player is actually rotated towards our AI. We can do it the other way around as well, but considering our AI is not going to be moving at this point, it makes more sense to have the player do it, because the player can only trigger any of this while standing in front of him. So it's just easier to have the player actually rotate towards the character. Now, you can even have him move in a certain spot if that's what you want. I'm not going to do that. I think this is completely fine. And then we're going to change his state this time, so it won't be a gesture. So let's just call in state. So we're going to change the state of both the player and the character. So let's first set up the player, because he will be talking. Now if you don't have those animations, just use something else. So let's make sure we actually select animation clip. I think they're called talk, yeah. Okay, so we're gonna ask a question because we're asking if we're going to hire him. So that's the one I'm using. And our character, so let's drag in our character again, is not going to be asking anything, so he will just use a normal conversation animation. So let's just loop this for a while. So I know 5 seconds seems like a lot, but if you have an actual conversation, 5 seconds is not a lot. And then once they're done talking, I obviously want, so I'm just going to duplicate, change player controllable again. Let's just drag it down, because now they're done talking and I want our player to be controllable again. At the same time, I want to call in state again, and let's just make sure the player state is just reset. This will make sure he goes back to his default animations. So let's all pull this down a bit because it takes up a lot of space. There we go. So we've reset our player. So we're going to do the same with our character. So let's just duplicate this and drag him in. So our character is reset to his default state as well. So those are all set, and then we're going to activate this start function. This will be activated. Now, in order for most of this to actually make any sense, let's set up the behavior tree, and that will explain it a lot better. Now, just like before, we're going to create a completely new behavior. So let's create a new behavior. Let's call this companion AI. There we go. Let's open this up. So this will actually be quite a relatively small behavior tree, but I'm going to show you that you can, if you want, do quite a bit more with it. I'm going to keep it, rather simple, because our AI is simply standing, but we're going to add a composite here, selector, and we'll be adding 3 tasks. There we go. So there will be 3 different states. Now in most of these behavior trees we always have can see first, but now there needs to be a behavior that supersedes can see. So we need to make sure that can see, our player, is actually in the second place. So let's open up can see. Let's already add this condition, and now the last condition is going to be set around our start. So let's grab that. Oh, we can't drag that in, of course. Sorry about that. So let's set up a variable again on the invoker, and let's just call it start. Let's just keep it simple. And this is a game object. And again, I know you can do everything I did with start with variables, but this just keeps things really simple for me. So this is my personal preference. I'm not saying it's the best way, but it's one that works. So once start is active, we are going to trigger his combat conditions. So let's add a simple wait. Let's give him 0.5 seconds to realize what happens, and then we're going to call conditions. Now we didn't set this up yet, but we did create our combat folder. So let's create a variable, and let's just call these combat companion. There we go. So we're going to create this one straight away as well. So combat companion. So if start is active, oh, this needs to be set to allow, apologies for that. If start is active, we are going into combat. Now this needs to supersede see player, because he will constantly be seeing our player. So if see player would be first, none of these actions would actually happen. So that's why see player needs to be in the second spot. Now, cannot see player, this needs to be allowed to complete as well. Cannot see player is lost, and he's not actually doing a lot here. He's just standing still, but you can obviously, if you've seen any of the other tutorials, you can set up patrol actions or just walk actions that he performs various tasks. But I'm just going to keep it really simple. But I'm already going to set him up with a gun. It's going to be using a revolver. So let's draw a revolver. I already created my first different weapon, which I'll go over in a separate video, but it's really simple to do. But let's just give him his revolver for now. And he has all of these things, so let's have him wait. So this is a bit of a cheating exercise. I was struggling a bit with having him not constantly draw his weapon. Oh, let's have him reload as well. Let's drag that in before. Let's make sure this is all invoker. There we go. So this wait 1000 seconds is a bit of a cheat, but it's simply because if we do not do this, he will constantly keep doing this. I've tried some ways, and if you found one, please let me know. But basically, if I'm not adding this weight, he will restart this once he follows us. It's really annoying. So that's why I'm adding the wait 1000 seconds. Now let's go over to the tasks. So what happens when he sees us? He's a really nice guy, so he's going to perform a gesture again. I'll be using the same gesture we set up before. So it was wave something. There we go. Let's wait until this completes, and just adding this for safety. I'm not really entirely sure if it's needed. Now we don't want him to be waving constantly, because that would just look ridiculous. But he only waves if he sees us. But if we keep standing in front of him, he shouldn't be constantly waving. So I'm just going to add 15 seconds. So every 15 seconds, he will be waving at us, just to make sure we actually see him there. But that's it. Now, next up, we've already called all of these actions. We have our two variables, and that's it. That's the entire behavior tree. Now you can make this a lot more interesting, to have him do a lot of things while he's just chilling. But I'm fine with that. I think he can just, wait here. Now, next up, we're going to be setting up his combat actions, which is the last thing we'll do. So this is a condition as well. So that's already set up. So let's just, drag everything in. So we'll drag in our companion AI behavior. We'll drag in start, and we'll drag in combat. So that's everything we're going to set up here. Now I'm going to copy over the actions combats I created for my enemy AI. And again, if you don't want him to engage in combat, you can just completely skip that. But I'm going to drag that over, add that here, because this is what I'll be using. Now we need to make sure this is actually different, so he shouldn't be targeting our player. So this is what happens if he sees our enemy. So if he sees our enemy, he's going to engage in combat with our enemy. So let's set this to our character. Now we can just keep using invoker, that's actually fine. So he's not going to be following our character if he sees our enemy. So we're going to be dragging in our enemy here. He's going to wait. He's going to stop follow. He's going to aim at the position. Now this needs to be our enemy. If you set up variables, you can have this work with several enemies. You get the point, but I'm just going to keep it to this one guy here, which is fine. And then he needs to not target us, he needs to target the enemy yet again. And wait, shoot, and there we go. That's all he's going to do. Now let's drag this in the else category. So this is everything he's going to do. Let's just keep this to none for now. Let's just first set up the condition. So if the character, our companion, can see our enemy, so let's drag him in. So if he can see our enemy, and and our enemy is alive. So this is the active. This is the alive function we set up here. If the enemy is alive, he will perform these combat actions. Now, in order to make sure, so this is where we had to set this up. In order to make sure he keeps checking this, because the problem is once he can see the character, he is still alive at this point, this will execute. Now if you choose restart action, it will never look at the clause again. It will just keep performing these actions. So restart action is going to be removed here, and we're going to conditions, call conditions, and we're going to literally call the conditions, these exact combat conditions. So what will happen at the end, it basically performs as a restart, considering this takes literally 0 time. He's going to go through this again and perform these actions. Now, if this changed, if our enemy is no longer alive, so once his health has reached below 0, he's going to trigger his ragdoll and inactivate the alive object here. So if this is no longer active, he will not perform these actions. He will actually not do any of this. So everything he's going to do here is simply follow our player, and that's literally everything he's going to do. So our invoker is going to follow the player. I don't want him to be too close, so let's change this distance, but that's it. So if he doesn't see anyone, he's going to just simply follow our player. If he sees our enemy, and he will engage in combat. He's using the exact same combat actions as our enemy, so that means he is not the best shot. Keep in mind that is related to this 0.5 weight. So let's lower that a bit to 0.2. But the weight basically decides how much time passes between aiming, rotating, and shooting. The longer this is, the least accurate it will be, because characters move around and he will shoot at the last position. So if you put this to 0, he will not miss at all. If you have a little bit of a wait, he might miss, and the longer that wait, the bigger chance of him missing. So there you go, that's literally everything we're going to set up here. So let's hit play and actually see if any of this even works. So let's see if we did everything right. No, we didn't. He's not drawing his weapon, and I forgot to turn on my UI. So let's turn on that UI again, and let's see why he didn't draw his weapon. He doesn't have his character shooter. Let's just call it shooter. Now if you want this to be a melee companion, obviously look up melee, character melee, and make sure that in the behavior he's actually drawing a melee weapon, which is draw weapon here. And you'd have to make sure that in combat, in actions combat, he's actually using melee combat actions instead of gun actions. I have a melee AI tutorial set up as well. You can simply use those combat actions instead of these combat actions, and make sure you made those couple of changes I made here. But that way it would be a melee companion instead of a shooter companion. So UI is back on. He now has a shooter component, so let's hit play again. There we go. He's reloading, ready for combat. He sees us. Now let's hold caps to hire him. The They're going to engage in a beautiful conversation, and he is going to follow us. Perfect. So let me just grab that revolver as well. We want this to be an unfair fight. He's still following me. That's great. Now, as you might remember, his field of view is really small, but he sees our player. Now, this is the delay I was talking about. Yeah, they're not great shots, but that's completely fine. Now, let's hope he finishes him off before I die. There we go. And our enemy ragdolls, and he goes back to following us. Now, the reason he goes back to following us is because that alive is no longer active. You can see it in the left corner, and because we were not restarting his combat behaviors, but we were calling conditions, it was checking again if alive was still active, and it wasn't. So that's why those actions do not start, and he reverts back to his normal follow actions. Now, you were absolutely amazing, but I need to let you go. He's going to wave, and he's going to go back home. Perfect. Now you can use the same alive to actually disable the enemy's health bar. So if he's no longer alive, you can check that, and then you can disable his UI as well. It works exactly the same. That's why I like using those functions. And we can hire him back again if we want. Yeah, my canvas was definitely a bit too small there. And that's it. Now, let's send you back. You did everything you're supposed to. There we go. Perfect. So there you go. Completely functioning companion AI. Now, I used him for combat actions. I used him for shooter combat. Couple of small changes. You can set him up for melee combat. But if you don't want him to engage in combat at all, just make sure you create some different actions. So what is he going to do when he follows us? So I set up combat actions here, but if you don't want him to engage in combat, then you set up different actions in this folder, and that's pretty simple. That's it. So thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, please hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.